Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of Road Rage. Well, what we're going to be doing here is just kind of going over the getting started, the basic things that you're going to need to do the wiring up on your 3 degree of motion sim. So it's the same as if you're going to wire up a 2 degree, but you're just going to be adding a little bit more equipment and a little bit more wires to get that traction loss. So let's go over some of the basic things that you're going to need. Number one, you need to go to XSimulator.net to the link that I'm showing you and download this wiring diagram. So it shows the Arduino that you're going to be wiring, what connections are made, the Hall effect potentiometers. Now you could, instead of using 3 of these, they're a little bit more expensive. They're like 25 bucks a piece. These are Hall effects. You could use 10K potentiometers like these, and basically they have 3 wires just like the Hall effect ones. Okay, so you can see that they have 3 wires, except for that the Hall effect ones, they can spin all around and around and around. So if your motor, somehow you don't get the signal to it correctly and it starts spinning around and around, these 10Ks, they can only go so far. They just go to there and that's it. And they go to there and that's it. And they're noisier too. Now we'll run a test on that at some point, but go to xsimulator.net, download this diagram. All the part lists are in the description as well. All right, so we've got the Hall effect potentiometers. You're also going to need 3, if you're going for a 3 degree of freedom motion rig, you need 3 of these IBT2 motor controllers. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. They're relatively cheap. One thing we're going to have to do is blow air onto the fins to keep them cool, but I'll show you how to do that later in a different video. Basically, for that one, we're just going to be using a 2-wire case fan, 12 volts, and that'll blow enough air to, keep those things cool. So we have the IBTs 1, 2, 3. We've got Hall effect potentiometers 1, 2, 3. The Arduino Uno. Now you could use one of these, which is the genuine deal article, Arduino R3, or you could use a clone. In this video, I'm going to be using. I've got a couple of these clones, so I'm going to be using one of these. They work just exactly the same, so I don't have a problem with that at all. Next, you're going to need 3 motors if you're doing a 3 degree of freedom. On the new rig, I've got 2 motors which control the pitch and the roll. So that's going to include surge, like accelerating, braking, that, and pitch, which is going up a hill or down a hill. Roll, which is going to be turning left or turning right. It's going to adjust those motors. And then the 3rd motor is for traction loss. Okay, so comes up to the next thing. Some type of power supply. I would recommend, at least in the beginning, maybe using some type of 12-volt battery. Keeps things simple. I haven't done any tests on converters where you can just plug them into the wall and out comes 12 volts. These are from the seat mover. These are 24-volt converters, and to be fair, they work just fine. But that's not this. Once I get some server power supplies in, I'm going to be doing a video on that for 12 volts. But for now, keep it simple. Probably use a battery. Another thing that I'm going to be using, at least I found very handy to use, you see all these connections? The red is actually plus 12 volts, and the black is actually ground or return. Well, I'm going to be using, you don't have to buy a lot of these things, but if you can find one, it's just a little board We're not going to be using all of these things, but we're just going to be putting positive on one side, and all the 12 volt connections are going to come off of that, and negative we're going to run over here, and all the black connections are going to connect to this. That way there's only so much space on these Arduinos. So this is the power rail on the Arduino. You can see you've got one 5 volt and a couple grounds. And we're going to be using that, but since there's so many different things that's going to hook to this, we don't want it. I mean, it's really easy to clog all this stuff up. So we're looking on the diagram. I've got 5 volts right here, and we're just going to run that 5 volts right to the edge here. And then we're connecting all of these little red connections right to that. We're going to do the same thing with ground. We're going to connect ground to here, and this is going to be this side. It's going to make more sense once I'm doing it. These things are pretty handy to have, and that's the way I'm going to be doing it to eliminate a lot of different wiring problems, which this could be confusing. It gets a little bit much to be hooking all these different things to just 5 volts and ground. So we're going to use this as an intermediary. Whether you use this, the genuine, or let's open this up and we'll take a look. Okay, yeah, so they come with a little USB cord that plugs it in. So if you take a look, fairly identical, at least for the pinouts like this, and they work perfectly. They work fine. Now we're going to be, it gets its power when we plug it into the computer with this. Don't try to get something other than an Uno R3, because they just won't work with the programming. You need this specific type. You don't need one of the other types of Arduinos, but you need the R3, Uno R3. Now the next thing that you're going to need is a soldering iron. I got this cheap one at Harbor Freight. It heats up the solder just fine. It works fine. All right, other than the soldering iron, which, like I say, you don't need an expensive one. You need one that will melt the solder. You're going to need some solder. And we'll take a look at this. So I've been using this for years. This is 6040 rosin core solder. Like I said, I've done a whole bunch of soldering, and I barely have gone through one $10 roll. And that's over the last, I don't know, 15 years. Before we move on from solder, which, you know, that you would think that everybody knows these type of things, but I've had a couple friends of mine that they were using the wrong type of solder, and very frustrating, because if you're using something other than 6040 rosin core, you can't get the solder hot enough, and so it looks like you're making the connection, but then it breaks off. Very frustrating. So you need the 6040, and if you're kind of like an old guy like me, I can't see all that good. So even with these reading glasses, it's not that good. So I need something different. I need a magnifying glass and one of these helping hands things. So a friend of mine said, hey, look what I found at the store. This is Harbor Freight, but I bought one from Radio Shack too, like 15 years ago. It just didn't have this light. So basically these things, they just hold your wire in place. So you basically have your wires in here. You can just position those things. You heat it up, and we're going to be going over this too. But what's cool about this is it's got this little canopy thing. Let me try to bring it down. So not only does it magnify it a little bit, it also, for us old guys, has a light. So I highly recommend having one that has a light. You know, it just helps you see. And there's nothing worse than not being able to see or not have enough light in your workspace to be able to do this kind of stuff. All right, so let's move on. You don't need a real expensive one. basically you just want a continuity tester, something that you can check for continuity. Say you solder these two pieces together, but you're not sure if they work, if they're making the connection or they're not on the right connection. Pick one of these up at the store, something like that, and you just put it on continuity, which is the ohm sign or the buzzer. And when you're touching them, it should make a sound like this, and it should read out 0 ohms. All right, so this is an important tool. Don't overlook it, because even though the connection looks like it's good, it might not be. So you need that kind of tool. It doesn't have to be expensive like that. They've got them for probably 10 bucks, probably. It does the same thing. You're just looking to make sure that the connections are there and that they actually are to the right pins, because even though this is simple and you're following it wire by wire, one wire at a time, I've even done it where I've thought I was on 9 and I'm actually on 10, and then you're like, oh crap, it's not working. But it will work if you check it and you go, oh, it's going to 10, it should be on 9. All right, so then you just unsolder it, solder it on 9. Let's talk a little bit about the wiring from the motor to the IBT. So from the motor, whether you choose crab pot motors, which they're 12 volts, 50 to 1, and you can get them from Canada if they have them in stock. So sometimes these things take a few, maybe a month or so to actually collect all the little parts that you need. The motors are super important. I would not try, if you're going to make a full frame 3 degree of freedom, or full frame 2 degrees of freedom plus traction loss, I wouldn't try to use windshield wiper motors unless they come from some big giant truck, and I wouldn't try to go that way. Keep it simple. Buy what you need and just use that. But anyway, so with the crab pot motors, off of there comes 16 gauge wires. All right, so I got 2 different colors, because off the crab pot motors they're blue and black, and I can keep these. I will always know that the blue wire and a blue and a black together are going to a motor. So basically we're going to be wiring from each motor up to these pins that call M, or motor, on the IBT. Now let me show you that real quick. Okay, so on the IBT there's an M plus and M minus. It doesn't really matter which of these that you're going to connect it to. We're going to run like a blue here and a black here, or we could run it black and a blue. You may end up switching it. It doesn't really matter as long as the motor is hooked to the ones that say M and M. Now these ones, the battery ones, that matters. That has to be battery plus and battery minus. So battery plus goes to the positive terminal, battery minus, that goes to the return, or the negative side. That's important. All right, so I picked up these 2 packages from Lowe's. They were maybe $6 a piece, and we're going to need that. Now let's just talk about the big part. From the battery, and we could draw in battery right here. Okay, we could do a battery. Okay, so plus is all going to be the red stuff, and minus is going to be the black. All right, so that's going to be a much larger gauge wire, and what we're going to do is distribute that power and ground using something like this. So we'll run from the battery to one of these terminals, we'll run from the ground to one of these terminals, and then from that we can splice off to each motor, and then we can just fuse this one thing right here. Now I'll show you how to do that, and we'll talk about fuses in the next video. But since you're going to be needing to order a few things. Let's put this on the list too. Speaking of ordering things, so what we're going to be using is 10 gauge. Okay, so this can, depending on the length, it can support like up to 30 amps of current. 30 amps is a lot, and your rig, it may peak at 30. It's not going to blow this wire up, I don't think, but it's not going to be a continuous 30 unless it's a 6 degree of freedom rig, and I haven't done one of those yet, so just don't assume that I know how to do that. It's going to be, those are going to have to be a little bit thicker, I would assume. But anyway, what you need is 10 gauge wire. I'm going to go with a red and a black. And we're going to put connectors on it, and we're going to connectorize it to the battery and put a shutoff. Now the last little bit of wiring, take a look. Okay, so looks kind of confusing. This is 22 to 24 gauge. I believe this is 24, so it's a little bit smaller than 22. And we're going to be using this is just a massive wire that I found on the ground. Commonly known as telephone wire. And basically, you'll be able to find this, or just look up 22 gauge or 24. Now, you don't want stranded wire. All right, so let's take a look. This is solid. If it's that little hairy stuff that's stranded, that's not good. You want the solid type. The little stranded ones are going to be a big problem, just because they spread out. You may have to twist them down. They're just more of a pain than they need to be. It looks like there's a bunch of different things that you need, and to be fair, there is some stuff you need. A motion rig has a lot of simple things going on. This is just the basic wiring. Like I said, let's just go over this, print it out, maybe print out 3 copies. That's what I did. I got 3 copies. And then when we start wiring it up, we're just going to highlight one wire at a time and then check the continuity and make sure it's okay. And then we'll move on from there. We're going to go over this entire diagram, well, at least a couple sections, just so that you know exactly what you're supposed to do. And when you're looking at your own, you can, have no fear. Maybe a couple hand tools, like I got this little pair of needle nose. Oh my gosh. Like maybe 25 years ago. And they're so cool. When I lost these for about 2 years, I used all sorts of needle nose. These ones are just real easy to bend the ends of the wire and stuff like that. So you're gonna, just pick up some hand tools. You don't need the most expensive ones. Look at this pair of dikes. Somebody, not me, was using it to pry something or something. It cuts, it's real sharp. And these things you probably don't need to order. You can probably just pick them up at Lowe's or Home Depot or one of those type of stores. We're gonna need something to put all this stuff in. So this is a 6x6 plastic box. Actually kind of expensive. It was like 16 bucks. So we'll take a look inside real quick, but we are going to be using this to mount all the different components in. Let's just get it open real quick. And so it's basically just an empty box with some screws in it. Don't really need this, but in any case, this top here, we're going to be measuring out the fan and cutting a relief for the fan. We'll probably mount the fan inside or on the top. And these fans, they came with these little shields so you won't drop stuff in it or get your hand cut in it or something like that. Something that humans do. That's probably why they added it. So anyway, you need a box. And what I'm doing this time is I'm going to be using 3/4 inch the plastic conduit to run my wires out of the box and onto the sim rig. Now, you don't have to do that, if you look at my daily driver, just wires are going everywhere. And, you know, that's going to happen. I don't care how clean or neat you try to make it. But on this new rig, I'm going to try to make it a little bit neater. So I got this little J box and a couple of these things. Basically, I'm going to set this inside, clamp it in. Most of the wires are going to come out here to the motors and things like that. Hopefully it keeps it a little bit cleaner, but we're going to be putting the IBTs in. We're going to be putting the Uno in, and we're going to be putting this little board in, and we need to make a provision for this type of USB connector. Alright guys, so that's going to wrap it up on this video. Hopefully I've got enough information out there so we can get started on the basic things that you're going to need. So if there's anything else, just go ahead and ask in the comments. I think one of the most trick things is this little on-off thing. Now, a long time ago I could see just fine, but as you get older you can't see worth crap. So this is real handy. I appreciate my friend showing me where to get it, and I'll put that link in the description too. I think it was maybe 10 bucks, and this is going to make it a lot easier for me. I mean, it's battery powered, so obviously you don't want to leave it on for like all night or anything because it'll be dead, but when you need it, it's going to be there. Next time we're going to be actually putting this stuff together, doing some wiring, and Dave out.